What is up, Flick fans, and welcome back to my channel. I have been doing tier lists as of late, but now I'm going back to the old ranking video and ranking all of the movies in the X-Men franchise. Now that I have seen X-Men Dark Phoenix, we will be placing that on this list, and I will be giving you guys an update, as I promised, on the tier list and tell you guys where Dark Phoenix would have been on that list. All of those things coming your way, and this is a very sad moment on this channel and in general because this is the end of the X-Men franchise under the Fox and Fox Alone banner. Now Disney has their hands on these characters. We shall see what they do, but there were some really good things to talk about in this X-Men franchise. And also some bad things. I need you guys to comment your thoughts down below. Which movies were your favorite, your least favorite? How did Dark Phoenix compare? Is it as bad as all of the critics were saying it was? Or was it better than you thought it was going to be? We will talk about all of that, and I reviewed Dark Phoenix on this channel. But right now, let's start at the bottom. And at the bottom, number 12, no, it is not Dark Phoenix. I have been seeing many people on Twitter and Instagram and all of these places ranking Dark Phoenix as their least favorite X-Men movie, and I understand that to a degree, but I cannot, in my right mind, put that below X-Men Origins Wolverine. This movie was just a complete mess, a debauchery of a film. It did everything wrong, and I will admit, when I was younger, I believe this came out in 2009, I actually enjoyed this film at the time. I was only 14 years old, so I didn't necessarily understand the fact that it was a very sloppy movie. I just saw, ooh, superheroes and fun and action, and yes, there's some great action scenes in here. I love the montage at the beginning with Sabretooth and Wolverine. I thought that was incredible, and I did like some of the characters. Ryan Reynolds was great as Deadpool, until they did the thing. Do I even have to say what they did? I'm not gonna say it. Listen, this movie is a mess. So many character arcs that go nowhere. The CGI is horrible. It's like they didn't know what they wanted to do. And Gavin Hood, who directed this film, I don't necessarily blame him for this movie. Yes, it was poorly directed, but there's a lot of studio interference going on here. You can feel that. You can see that. There were many rumors of that, and it all came together to create what I believe to be, and this is not factual, just my opinion, clearly the worst movie in the franchise. Coming in at number 11, this was not in last place, but it did get closer than I wanted it to. So I didn't have a huge level of anticipation going into this movie. I did think it was going to be not the best, and it did turn out to be not the best. Now, was it as bad as I think some people are saying? No, I definitely think my number 12 is my number 12, and this will never get there, but I do think this is a movie full of missed opportunities. I just talked about it in my review last night, but Dark Phoenix is a film with fantastic actors and really good talent behind the camera. Even people who wrote the script are talented, but the dialogue and the story in general, not having the emotional connection to these characters that we had with the other cast, maybe one or two more movies would have helped us. I didn't feel for Jean Grey like they wanted me to. I really enjoyed the train scene at the end. I enjoyed the beginning of the movie when they're showing off their X-Men powers and they're working as a team, but everything in the middle felt bland, hollow, and a bit lifeless, and the villain, Jessica Chastain's villain, is one of the worst villains I've seen in a long time. Just a movie full of missed opportunities, sloppy direction, everything in that sense. Once again, I don't think it is a literal train wreck, even though there's a train wreck in the movie. I did think it was just very disappointing. Next up is a film that a lot of people consider to be hot garbage, and I don't necessarily think this movie is hot garbage. I think it's a mess in the same vein of X-Men Origins Wolverine. I just think it's a better constructed movie, and Brett Ratner he wasn't the guy for the job. Let's face it, he was not the guy to come in and take the reins from Bryan Singer and deliver a great trilogy capper on top of the first two movies that we got. Now, in terms of what the characters do in this movie and the plot direction, it makes sense to go in this direction. It makes sense to give us this movie and this storyline, but the execution, in my opinion, was not there for X-Men The Last Stand. I liked a lot of the choices in the film. It's just where they went and where we were by the end of the movie as the audience. It's like Magneto, his hangout is in the woods where there's barely any metal. They're going about recruiting all of the really strong mutants, and Magneto's like, what can you do? And then in comes the guy with 2-inch spikes coming out of his skin. So you're telling me that is one of the most powerful and evil mutants that you could have recruited right there. The guy that will not hurt you unless you get within like a few inches of his body. It's just decisions like that they don't make a lot of sense. There's a lot of throwaway characters. I think Juggernaut was completely botched. Thank goodness for Deadpool 2 bringing us a really good version of the Juggernaut. Yes, some of the dialogue is entertaining. I thought the death of Professor X was actually very well handled, and that entire scene, the CGI in that scene where the house is floating, there are some really good moments in this movie. It's just overall coming together to create a cohesive film. I don't think it did that, and it was such a disappointment from what the first two gave us. I have to put it this low on the list, even though I don't necessarily think it's horrible. I just think it's I feel like I'm just going to keep saying it's about the X-Men franchise because so many people want to say there are so many bad movies in this franchise, and I don't necessarily want to use the word bad. I would use the word underwhelming or just fine. That's one thing I see nowadays is people don't want to acknowledge that a movie is either fine or not very good, right? It either has to be a masterpiece or it has to be horrible. X-Men Apocalypse is clearly neither of those things. It's not great. It's not all that bad, but it's just meh. And that's what I found this movie was when I went back to do a revisit a few days ago. I actually thought it was okay walking out of the theater for the first time. I enjoyed moments, I enjoyed characters, and I thought the potential of where the film could have went was there. It's just the execution, in my opinion, maybe wasn't the best, but I still had fun with it. I loved the Quicksilver moment. I love Magneto's entire storyline with his family, but going back and rewatching it now, a few years later, it's nowhere near as fun as I remember. It felt more sloppy to me, and maybe I was watching it with the goggles of, oh, I want this to be really good, and I love this cast, and I love these characters, and I thought it was okay walking out, but now I look at it and I'm just like, maybe it's not even all that good. Maybe it's just kind of below average, or at least average. It's a throwaway superhero movie film, if you want to look at it that way, with some nice moments, with some nice characters, and with this cast. And maybe that's one of the reasons why I had so much fun with it the first time, is because this cast is awesome and these characters are great. But Apocalypse should have been and could have been a Thanos-level villain, and he wasn't. He was a throwaway villain who goes and recruits Angel and Psylocke as some of the strong... Once again, the same issue I have with X-Men The Last Stand. What are you doing, man? Just the ideas and concepts that went into this film and Magneto's storyline, which was great, but where it ends up in the third act, I was also disappointed with. Here's what I'll say about Apocalypse. You can have some fun with it, absolutely. I do not think it is a despicable movie, but if you go back and you watch it, if it's been a few years, I don't think you'll enjoy it as much. Now, we are at number 8, right? We've already talked about 4 movies, and from here on out, I want to say I enjoy, to a degree, to love all of the movies that we are going to talk about. And that's my thing with this X-Men franchise. I don't think it's all that bad. I don't think it's as bad as some people say that it is. You may not love every movie. You may not like the 2 movies that I'm about to talk about, but from there on out, there are some movies to absolutely love and gravitate towards in this franchise. And I'm truly going to miss it. I'm going to miss what Fox did with the great movies. I'm not going to miss what they did with the bad movies, but they did deliver on some great things. And the next movie I want to talk about is the first, the second, but really, in my mind, in our hearts, it's the first. Wolverine movie starring Hugh Jackman, directed by James Mangold, who brought us Logan. We'll talk about that here in a bit. Listen. The Wolverine was okay. It wasn't all that bad. It wasn't all that good. They did get to that third act and everything just kind of spirals out of control. And that third act is significantly worse than the first 2 acts of the movie. But I like the first 2 acts. I like Wolverine going overseas, doing his thing, meeting all of these characters. Certain characters like Viper, she was completely over the top. I didn't love what they did with the samurai. That should have been more well executed. And I really love the hard R-rated cut of this movie. It's really what we got in Logan. And there are some great moments in the first 2 acts, like I said, in this movie. The violence, the action, of course, the acting by Hugh Jackman. I can commend that in every movie I talk about on this list. But overall, the movie is okay because I thought it gave us a really good first act, a pretty solid second act, and a third act that completely falls apart. And what do you remember about a movie? You remember the last few moments, what you walk out with, and most of the time that has to do with the final few scenes. And this movie ends on a really bad note. Although, I'll say the scene where Wolverine is walking and all of the ninjas are stabbing him with those sticks and he's still walking, I'm like, that's Wolverine. I'm still going. Coming in at number 7 is the very first X-Men, the OG, the one that started it all. And I understand why there are some that still love this movie. I don't love it Once again, I like it. I think it's good. I think it's solid enough. I think it did what it had to do to start this franchise off, and I really love the cast. That's the thing I can say about every X-Men movie once again, is the casting is fantastic. From the old cast to the new cast to Hugh Jackman, who I think is the shining beacon of this franchise. Everyone is so good in this first movie. I like how they focused on Rogue. That was a nice, different thing that we hadn't gotten in a superhero movie before. Following a character like that on a journey where she meets all of these other heroes and characters, and that third act, which, you know, doesn't necessarily hold up in terms of action and what superhero movies do today, and maybe visually CGI wasn't the best as well, but it's a movie that came out how long ago? Almost 20 years ago, so you have to forgive it for some of those things. It doesn't hold up as well as some of the other early X-Men movies, but it's still the one that started it all. I really enjoy it. I have fun with it every time I go back and revisit it. It's not great, but it's solid. Next up is the sequel to the first Deadpool, and this is Deadpool 2. You know, I go back and I watch Deadpool 2 now, and I don't like it, and I don't think I don't like the movie. I thoroughly enjoy the movie, but I don't like it as much as I did the first time that I watched it. Going back through that story, I did notice some storytelling flaws. It's just not as strong of a story as the first one. It's more action-packed, and the action is actually better because you have the guy from John Wick coming in there and throwing in his directing talents, which I thought he did a good job with, and I like the look and the soundtrack of the film, even though one thing I do miss is the score of the first Deadpool, and really the story of the first Deadpool. Not that I wanted the same story, but I wanted one that was as emotionally impactful. You have that relationship between he and Vanessa in the first one, and there are elements that carry over into this one. The entire movie is about his sobbing over the character of Vanessa, but there was just nothing in the sequel that I gravitated towards. But I know many people who love the sequel more than the first, and I understand. I still thoroughly enjoyed it, had a lot of fun with it, cracked up the entire way through. The humor is always there with Deadpool through the first two movies. I haven't watched the edited version, the one that came out during Christmas time yet, but I really enjoy Deadpool 2. I think it's a super solid sequel, one of the better sequels in the X-Men and really the Marvel franchises, and that's why it's so high up on this list. Now we get into the top 5, and my number 5 is X-Men First Class. I love this movie. I think it is so good. I think Matthew Vaughn did a fantastic job with this film. A lot of people have it in their top 3, and some people even claim that it's the best X-Men movie, and you know what? I can't argue that. It is so much fun to see these characters come together for the first time. My only issues is that some elements of the team coming together did not necessarily work for me, and there were certain characters that were a bit throwaway. They were kind of forgotten about in the third act, but you have James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender coming together to create one of the best relationships I have ever seen in a superhero movie in this film, carrying on over into Days of Future Past, guys. Matthew Vaughn rocked this movie. It is colorful, it is fun, the third act is entertaining. I love the team coming together. The only thing we were missing was Wolverine, but you know what? I'm going to take that back because I didn't miss Wolverine. And that's one thing. If you can make a great X-Men movie without Hugh Jackman playing Wolverine, who is fantastic, then I commend you. And they did just that. At number 4 is X-Men 4. There's not an X-Men 4. It's X2. I really enjoyed X-Men 2. Now, I used to have it in my top 3. It was taken out of that top 3 more recently when I started to sit down and think about, okay, how do I feel about these other 3 movies? But that doesn't mean I don't love it. Listen, I love this movie. I truly and thoroughly love it. It was actually a bit of a challenge going back and rethinking on First Class and X2, which one I liked more. And you ask me on a different day, I could give you a different answer, but X2 was a sequel for me that was significantly better than the original. It started out this really good storyline with Jean Grey. You did have the love triangle between Cyclops and Hugh Jackman and Jean Grey. I just called him Hugh Jackman. He's Wolverine. That could be something that makes your eyes roll back in your head and like, okay, but it works. It's entertaining. This movie is action-packed. Wolverine trying to discover his past and where that ends up in the third act is one of the best storylines for any superhero I've ever seen in a superhero movie. And because of all of those things, X2 belongs at this spot on my list, but I want to see where you guys have it. Coming in at number 3 is a lot of people's number 1s, but I just love these 2 movies with everything in me, and I love Deadpool with everything in me, but that is the one that ended up at number 3 for me. Listen, I think this movie is hilarious. I think it's so well directed. I think Tim Miller did a phenomenal job, and Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool. The reason I didn't talk about him earlier is because I want to talk about him now. Yes, his surrounding cast is great in this movie. TJ Miller is awesome in this film. And even going back to the second one, Josh Brolin and Zazie Beetz, they were great. But the shining beacon is always Ryan Reynolds because he just knows how to deliver the snappy dialogue. Yes, they have a script, and yes, they follow the story, but his ad-libbing is some of the best I've ever seen. He is Deadpool. I see his videos on Twitter, I'm like, that's Deadpool. And yes, the movie's really good. I love the romance. I think it's one of the best romances we've ever seen in a superhero film, and it's hilarious, but Ryan Reynolds is this movie. He is the beating heart and soul with Tim Miller's really solid direction, and like I said earlier, I love the score in this film. Everything works for Deadpool. Not every joke landed, like 90% of them did, but you don't expect every joke to land. My favorite comedies of all time, not every joke's land. But that's the thing about a comedy. You try things, you test things, you see what works. Deadpool tried it, and they absolutely succeeded. Numero uno is... Tuno's not a word. At number 2, we have X-Men Days of Future Past. I love this movie, probably more than most. I'm looking on Letterboxd, IMDb, and all of these critic sites, and I'm like, man, I just think I like Days of Future Past more than most critics. I thoroughly enjoy everything that it did to combine two completely different casts playing the same characters from two different time periods, even though, like we always say for this universe, continuity, schmontinuity, they don't care about continuity. There are so many things in this movie in particular, but really the entire franchise, mostly X-Men Origins Wolverine, because that really didn't pay attention to continuity, but there are things that just do not make sense when you line them up with other movies. But you look at the quality of this film, and I know some people don't want to say his name, but I have to acknowledge that Bryan Singer did a great job, regardless of how you feel about him as a person, as a director. For this movie in particular, like I said, bringing the cast together, paying off on things fans thought they would never see with the old cast. Iceman, we finally get to see him in full glory. Storm gets some great moments. Magneto has his powers back from X-Men 3. How did that happen? We don't care. They don't explain it. They don't need to explain it because the movie's so good. The movie was so fun. Following Hugh Jackman around on this journey, the perfect person to send back just because the other characters could not have carried that on their shoulders. The Quicksilver scene in this movie, I like the one in X-Men Apocalypse. I think this one steals the show, combining the music and the visual effects and the way they went about doing that, guys. It was so awesome. And then that third act, that moment where Mystique, Jennifer Lawrence's final performance as Mystique, because clearly she didn't show up for the last few movies, is holding up that gun, and that monologue that James McAvoy gives her, all of that falls into place perfectly. I love those moments. I love the addition of Peter Dinklage. He's really good in this movie. There were a few characters here and there that were underserved, but overall, the movie, for me, is a massive feat, something that I never thought they could accomplish, something 10 years ago I never foresaw them trying to accomplish, but they did. Oh my gosh, this movie's 5 years old. Guys, I love Days of Future Past. I never thought an X-Men movie could surpass this until the number 1. Before I give you guys my number 1, if you guys want to hit that thumbs up button, if you enjoyed this video, let me know in the comments down below. I will do more if you guys like this style. Let's talk about number 1. And that number 1 is Fantastic Four, guys. I think Fantastic Four is an absolute masterpiece. What Josh Trank did, I'm just kidding, it's Logan. Logan is awesome. I've talked about it so many times on this channel, and there has been a bit more pushback lately compared to when it first came out. There are people now that say, well, the villains weren't that strong, and there were elements of the story that didn't work for me, and that's fine. Every movie faces some sort of backlash, and every movie that is praised to this degree has this spell, has this period of time where people maybe don't like it as much as they did when they first watched it. I'm not one of those people. I think Logan is freaking amazing. Maybe it's James Mangold's style. I believe he learned from his mistakes that he made in the Wolverine. He said, no, you're not interfering with me, studio. I am making my movie. This is a superhero Western, pure and full of heart. And this little girl, I want to see her back so bad as X-23. Why have they... Oh, well, that's because Disney has the characters now, but I would just love to see her pop up again. I know it's not going to happen, but she was so good as this character. Professor Xavier in this movie, Patrick Stewart, he deserved an Oscar nomination, in my opinion. He was so good. And Hugh Jackman as this character. I mean, you talk about a way to end his Wolverine career. What a way to go out. You can say the same thing. Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark, the way he went out in Avengers Endgame. Heck, Christian Bale in The Dark Knight Rises, the way he goes out in that movie. But now you have, well, before Tony Stark, you had Wolverine going out in Logan on top of the freaking world because he was so good in this movie. And this movie, the level of quality here, filmmaking wise, even if you didn't have the best time in the world, and even if this isn't the most entertaining and grand scale superhero movie of all time, I love it because it's so well made. The colors, the direction, the cinematography, the music, the fact that we get to see Wolverine go full R-rated Wolverine throughout the entire movie, guys. Everything here works for me. The villains, the heroes, all of it. I love it. You guys know I love it. I have talked about it thoroughly on this channel, and that's it, guys. Those are all of the movies in the Fox X-Men universe ranked on my channel. Now, real quick, I promised you guys I would do this. If you watched my tier video where I placed all of the X-Men movies in different tiers, I have shifted a few things, and I start with X-Men Apocalypse. I told you guys it would be on the same tier as Wolverine. I have actually moved it down a tier because I rewatched it this last week, and it definitely was not as good as I remembered it being a few years back. And if I had to place Dark Phoenix on a tier, I would put it right next to X-Men The Last Stand on that E tier. Not quite the F tier. It is closer than you might want it to be, but it is of that quality. Which one's best? Well, you can watch the video to find that out. And I truly appreciate you guys watching this entire video. You can go back and check out my tier list if you want to see where I would clump all of the different movies, and stay tuned to this channel because a lot more movie reviews, Netflix reviews, and tier lists to come. We have a lot to talk about this weekend. You guys are the absolute best. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you very soon.